Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here.
Can say again, please.
Houston, we've had a problem.
Hey there and welcome to the Art Lab. My name is Andy and today we're going to be making our own silicone mould using a sheet of plastic and some chalk, or silicone sealant as it's also known. The great thing about this method is that you can make the mould exactly how you like it. So it's going to take a couple of layers to build up this chalk or silicone sealant on the plastic. So let's just dive in and we'll get started. Might be a bit hard to see, but we've got a sheet of plastic here which is on top of my work table. And this is nice and flat. So using our chalking gun, we're going to be able to create the pattern on here. So at this stage you've really got to know what image you have in your head so you can visualize that and then put it down on the plastic. So my whole goal here was to create a sunflower. I'm sure as you see this come together in front of you, you'll look at it and go, that doesn't look like a sunflower. And yep, you're right. Look, I wasn't aiming for perfection here. It was really just experimenting to see if I can use this silicone chalk to create a mold for resin and create an artistic impression of a sunflower. We'll just kind of leave it at that. From the point of view of creating this as a mold, it was really important to get the silicone caulk down and touching that plastic, and this was important because I didn't want to get leaks. You would have seen at the beginning that that's not the case, but the key thing was to really just get that bond between the plastic sheet and silicone, and so when it dried, that once I filled it with resin it wouldn't come out of there. My sunflower was really starting to take shape, and really it was just a matter now of waiting for it to dry.
1 day later.
So just waited overnight and it was then touch dry the next day. So it all hardened up and was ready for my resin pour. So I really hope people don't mind me speeding up the footage here. A little bit ADHD myself and my attention span is quite short, so I like to sort of watch some of this stuff and fast forward. When I'm editing, you're sort of zipping through and it's definitely a lot quicker than just watching the whole thing. Anyway, this stage of the project, that was really around getting that resin into the mould. Now I had 3 colours that I really wanted to play with here. I wanted to have a clear so that we had some of the tips of the sunflower were in a clear colour. And then I wanted yellow, obviously, to be the predominant colour. And also I wanted to put some black in there. And the black was really mainly around the centre and some of the edges of the flower petals, and I really just wanted to get that mix of black, yellow and clear, and hope that it would come out and sort of mix together nicely, and in the end it has, and I'm really pleased with that result. But you just got to watch a little bit further to see how it comes out. And here we are, we're at the Houston I have a problem stage. This is where the first leak started appearing on this petal, and even though I wiped it up, my hope was that maybe some of the resin could dry a little bit and then it would fill the gaps and I could fill the rest of this flower petal. So when I was doing this, I had put quite a bit of focus on trying to ensure that the silicone sealant was touching the clear plastic, but both of these being clear plastic and a clear silicone, it was a little bit hard to actually see that that contact was being made there, and this is where it wasn't in this case, because you have the 2 edges joining, and unfortunately one of the edges came up and sat on top of the first layer, and that meant that there was a small gap there, making a place essentially for that silicone to run out. So I essentially abandoned that petal because I knew that if I put more resin in there it was just going to continue to flow out, so that meant I would be one short and I will need to create a new one. So my tip for next time if I do this is that I'll create additional petals than what I need so that I can always have a spare one.
A few hours later.
Alright, so we've had a little bit of leakage here, not as tacky, but it's still a bit too wet, so I just need to wait for it to cure a little bit longer. So this is still comes off, but as you can see, I think it probably needs another half an hour.
30 minutes later.
Right, so the resin is now at a stage that it can come off the clear plastic, and it's still a little bit bendable, which is exactly the state I want it in, and that's because I'm going to do a little bit of manipulation of these petals so that they can curve up a bit. I want my flower to be able to have the petals curving out, and so here I am pulling the petals off and also doing a bit of shaping. So one of the things that I've learnt along the way is that you can use rubber bands in a handy dandy way, and that is to sort of use them to sort of fold or keep the shape of your resin. The great thing that I liked about creating your own silicone mold is that every petal is going to be unique and completely different, and so using these rubber bands, that's another way to add some uniqueness to each of your petals. And I'm just using whatever's lying around here, some the silicone from the mold, to just prop it up a little bit so that the petals, when they're all joined together, are sort of pointing out to the viewer. You can also see on the right hand side here that some of the main petals I've put into a bowl, and that's once again to give that curvature. So as they set and as that resin hardens, then it's going to give that permanent shape to these flower petals so that they're nice and flat where they're going to join together, but then they come out towards the person who's going to be viewing your artwork.
One day later.
I love it when a plan comes together. That's right, we're now at a stage where the resin has cured, it's nice and hard, and I need to do a little bit of trimming up, and then I'll be able to start placing those petals around the inner piece of the flower and start building that out. So it's time to use one of my favourite resin tools. If you don't have one of these deburring tools, then you need to get yourself one if you're dealing with 3D printing or resin. They're handy for both of those different mediums. You can find a link in my description below if you want to grab one of these off Amazon, but I just find them so handy to take off the lip that you get on coasters or anything like that with resin pouring, and they just become really handy instead of having to sand. So my first challenge with this was having the leaks with the resin. The second challenge was actually remembering where each petal went. So this was a little bit of trial and error where I had to go around and see where they fit against the center of the flower, and some of those I had to do a bit of extra trimming just to make sure they fit around, because it wasn't a perfect circle. As you saw when I put that silicone down, it was definitely open to artistic impression in creating this flower. My go-to for joining pieces of resin together is using UV resin. Now the cool thing about UV resin is that you can cure it really quickly once you hit it with that UV light, but it's in a state where you can position it around to exactly where you want it before you want it to cure. So I really love that about using UV resin, and once it has cured, it's really strong, and so it works really well for instances like this where I'm putting all these petals against the flower. First layer of petals have been laid down, and now it's time to put that second layer. Now of course you're not going to see behind the flower when it's hung up on the wall, so the key here is really just to get those petals to stick to each other, and it doesn't matter if it's a little bit messy in the back, the front is really what's going to be presented, and so my goal here is just to make sure that there's no gaps.
One day later.
So even though I tried my best not to get any overrun of UV resin onto the front of the flower, there was still a little bit that seeped through, and so what I decided to do was to give it a top coat or a flood coat across the whole front of the flower. This would do a couple of things. One, it would help just stick those petals together even more, and it would also eliminate any of those sort of extra bits of UV resin which showed out because the top coat could sort of cover that UV resin and make it nice and glossy and ready for presentation. So here's the finished piece. The top layer of resin that I did yesterday I'd hoped would dome around the edges a little bit. They still are a little bit sharp and didn't work as I expected, but I still really like how this came out. So it is a bit of a experiment, and that's what you got to do with art, and I quite like it. Not sure about you, but this was a method where I've used silicone chalk to create a mold and then glue all that all together. Anyway, love to know your thoughts. Put them in the comments below and let me know what I should create next.